Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, and children. It's very good to see you all this morning, and it's very good to see children present in the audience. I also, as one of the other activities that I get involved in, find myself tutoring philosophy in the School of Philosophy, and it's always very good to see children in those groups as well. It's very interesting to see actually what the children actually gain or gather from the philosophy. Welcome to you all. I would like, first of all, you to picture a scene, really, in your mind's eye, if you could. It's a Monday morning, perhaps, 8:15 in the morning. Some of you might be going off to work. By 8:15, most of the children have arrived at school, girls, boys. And they move into an assembly room, very much like this one, just next door. And they sit down, brought to quiet, to stillness, to quietness, just like you have come to quietness and stillness. And they then embark upon a period of prayer. Short prayers are spoken, the Lord's Prayer is spoken. And then the headmaster addresses the assembled gathering and speaks to these children. And these children vary in age from 4.5 right the way through to 10. So it's quite a wide range of ages. And he speaks to them about the philosophy of Advaita in very simple terms, very simple terms. He speaks of the self or the consciousness which is there in every created thing, in every being, that which is common to every human being, to every form that's brought into existence. And he speaks about this, and as you might expect, some children are fully attentive, all eyes on the headmaster. Others are looking at their shoelaces and untying them and doing them up again. Others are poking each other in the ribs. The usual sort of array of activity. But there's a measure of stillness and quiet, and then the headmaster invites them to embark upon a very simple experiment. They're asked to face each other, to look each other in the eye, but before doing this they're brought to even deeper stillness, even quieter. So the room becomes really, truly still. You could hear a pin dropping. And he gets them to look each other in the eyes. They turn towards each other and gently raise their eyes and look. And there may be the odd snigger, but there's this level of quiet, as there is here now. And they look at each other in the eyes. And in the quiet, the headmaster asks the question, "Now, what did you see?" And rather right now, it's very quiet. Then one little chap puts up his hand and says, "A fish." And of course, everyone gets the idea now. What did anybody else see? "I saw a fish as well." And so it goes on. And in a sense, one feels that this almost epitomizes what one might call the spirit of childhood. When the original invitation was given to speak about the child in some way, the original suggestion was to speak about education and the young child. That was the general direction. There was no particular title chosen, but that was the direction. And so it was agreed that I should speak about this, and yet I wasn't at all sure that I really knew a great deal about it, and I certainly didn't feel the title was right. And then this concept of the spirit of childhood came to mind. And that somehow seemed a much more pertinent title, because what you begin to become aware of very quickly when working closely, particularly with the young child, is a sense of spirit, of great spirit. Now, we may all have different concepts as to what spirit might be. If you're currently attending a philosophy course, your notion of spirit may well be changing. It may well be growing. It may be becoming more established. Who knows? But in working with young children, one becomes very aware of spirit. And it's a very difficult thing to define precisely what it is, but it does very obviously manifest itself. I've spent quite a number of years teaching, and much of my teaching career has in fact been with much older children. I've taught in senior schools of various descriptions. So we've been dealing with children between the ages of 11 and 18. And that's always very interesting. You have a subject that you're going to teach. You have a very definite syllabus that you know you've got to get through. There are examinations going to be appearing at very definite stages in the child's career. And when you've been teaching for maybe 5 years, 6 years, you begin to become pretty clear as to how you're going to do it, exactly how you're going to approach it. You know what the right step is to do. If you've got a class of riotous boys, you bring them to a measure of order pretty quickly, because you know full well that nothing much will get through if you have to teach them about simultaneous equations or graphs or something like this. You have to impart a very particular message. It has to be addressed to the mind of those children, and there's a limited time in which to do it. You've got a 40-minute lesson. You make your lesson plan, you go in and you teach. You may not stick rigidly to your plan, but you're very clear about what you're teaching, how you're going to teach it. And things develop pretty much as you would expect them to, once you've been practicing for a while. It's not always like that in the early stages. In the early stages it's much more a learning operation, but after a while you become well practiced and established in the routine of teaching. About 3.5 years ago I was invited, because my class had arrived at the stage of taking their GCSEs. They took their GCSEs and went off into the sixth form. I was invited to come and take young ones, 4.5-year-olds. And I thought, yes, that would be a very nice idea. Wasn't sure that I knew a great deal about looking after 4.5-year-olds. But soon enough, I found myself in front of a class of 16 4.5-year-olds. And it was like literally walking into a completely different world. Having been in the world of the young adult and then going into the world of the young child, it was almost like going from a realm of relative darkness to light, is how one could describe it. It was very clear from the outset, for example, that you could have no fixed ideas as to how you were going to present any particular subject. In fact, even the notion of subject had to go out of the window. To a little child, I mean, what does it mean to talk about a subject? It doesn't mean anything. At 4.5, some knew their tables, some knew their alphabet, some didn't. So you would stand up in your usual schoolmasterly way, rather as I am now, and start talking to them, you see. And then, because they either couldn't understand or just were not interested, they'd end up playing on the floor, or some might walk out of the door, you know. I mean, there are much more interesting things in a school than listening to some chap talking about goodness knows what. And what one began to be presented with was this extraordinary fluidity of childhood. And one is talking now about really very young children, but in fact, if you look even at the teenage end, there is this measure of fluidity to the young, which was it was actually quite unexpected. Perhaps one should have been better prepared for it. Perhaps one might have considered it more, but there was no doubt about it, being faced with it. This extraordinary fluidity of children. Now, what does one mean by that? Well, one doesn't just, of course, mean that they all end up crawling all over the floor at 4.5, not at all. They loved games. In fact, the only way, one quickly discovered, the only way in which to impart any seeming knowledge, any what one might call knowledge, was to invent games, to play games. If you wanted them to walk up the stairs quietly, it was no use saying, now, I want you to walk up the stairs quietly. It just wouldn't work. They just ended up chattering and walking backwards. And because again, A stair is a whole world to the young child. It's a world. It's a world full of the unknown. It's a world full of enormous possibilities. Just a stair. 10 flights of steps. Anything could happen. 10 treads of steps. You could have a good fight with somebody. You pretend you're an explorer going up a mountain. It can be used in all sorts of ways. I recall going to somebody's house this summer, and there was a great to-do on the stairs, and we went out to the stairs, and there they were climbing up the stairs, these young children. These were 7 or 8. They had ropes, great long ropes, sort of tow ropes, the sort of thing you have in your car, which is a tow rope, isn't it? Well, to the child it was a climbing rope. And this was a great mountain. And they had these ropes tied round, and they had various sorts of things which they'd improvised as harnesses. It was a whole world that was possible to them. So this aspect of fluidity seems to imply many things. The fact that in every situation the young child finds itself, and certainly one has found this with the children one's been taking thus far, every situation is new. Every situation is full of possibilities. It is unknown. And therefore, a realm in which to explore, to discover what it's like, to be a mountaineer, or to be a policeman, or a father or a mother. So one was presented with this extraordinary fluidity of the children. And what other ways might one describe this fluidity? But of course what was also very striking in taking these very young ones was the fact that the needs of the child change very, very quickly, very rapidly. One minute the child would be happy and perhaps doing some colouring. Then suddenly in tears, for no apparent reason. Ask them, what's wrong? Oh, my mummy. And for that moment of time, that's what would hold the stage entirely, totally consume that child. And very difficult to be reasonable with a child of 4.5. You could talk about where mum is, and you can try and explain that mum's going to come back in 6 hours' time or whatever. But an hour doesn't mean anything to a child. Time, the whole concept of time to the child is in fact entirely meaningless. For them the time is here and now, this very present moment. And so if that was what was the present idea making itself felt, that mummy was needed now, mummy had always been around and ready to be turned to at any moment of the day, if that's what came in, that was what consumed the stage. And the only thing that you could do in that situation, indeed the only thing you can do in that situation, is to bring the child to some other presentation in the present, perhaps change the game, change the activity, go on to learning the letters, go on to reading, but in some way alter what was being presented to that individual's consciousness there and then. And that's how it proceeds and proceeded. So this extraordinarily rapidly changing scene was something which was really not at all prepared for. The fact that activities needed to be changed perhaps every 5 minutes, maybe every 10 minutes, maybe every 15 minutes, but throughout the day, continually responding, the need to respond entirely to the needs of those children meant responding almost moment by moment to what was presenting itself there and then. I had an assistant at the time, which was very useful. It was a young lady who had been taught in a Montessori school and had quite a lot of experience with these young children. And it was just very interesting to see how she would handle the children, and how quickly she could, as it were, move around the various needs and just spot what the obvious needs were. And sometimes the needs are so obvious you miss them. For example, after about an hour on the first day, one had hardly noticed the fact that the children were sort of beginning to get a bit jittery. They were beginning to sort of move around really rather a lot, beginning to crawl under the tables and getting up and getting down, and there's a lot of movement. And then the suggestion was made, come on, let's get them outside, get them moving, get them into some activity, give them some games to play, some actual physical games to play. That was obviously the right need. So there was this enormous need with the young child to, as a teacher, respond to their, what one could call responsiveness, because the child responds incredibly quickly. If the child's hungry, the very young child, as soon as the young child is hungry, it may say it's hungry, it may scream, it may cry, it will respond in whatever way it has up to that point of time learned. But it will be immediate. And all the time, in coming back to the consideration of the young child, one is forced to come back to this as one of the key elements in the spirit of the child: immediacy. The child lives in a very immediate world where what is happening now is what affects and governs what that child is experiencing and learning, in fact. The immediacy of the present for the child. Now, there are a number of other very interesting aspects to children in general, and certainly it becomes very obvious in the young child. If you start to look at for example, the physical body of the child, particularly when you see the very youngest child, the baby that's just been born, lying in its cot, they again are very obviously very responsive. They can be extraordinarily content. Young children can be extraordinarily content for periods of time, and then suddenly there's an eruption. Something is demanding attention. Any mothers here will recognise that. Anybody who's been with children, young children on a train, will recognise this. They can be full of light, happy, content. Suddenly there's this almost explosion takes place. Maybe crying, maybe groaning, whimpering. It can be through anything, but there's this demand upon the attention. But with a very young child, if you look at the child and the body of the child, you become very aware of the perfection of the body, what a beautifully perfect body it is. Everything is there in potential. It's plainly not a fully developed body, and yet it's all there, beautiful in its form. But for the child, it's something quite new. Something that it has to discover about. And you actually can see, you can watch a young child discover its own body. Actually start to look at its hand. And you actually see young children looking at their limbs. As it were, seemingly from the outside, it looks almost as if discovering the fact that this is a limb and it does things. And you begin to see them doing things with their limbs. They move them around, and when they're quiet, in this quiet condition, plainly looking at it and rather interested in it and playing with fingers and playing with toes and then trying them, you know. It's always good, I'm sure, as a baby to try everything out, and one of the first things you try is to try and eat. Try it and see what a toe tastes like, a finger. They begin to move into the world of discovering their body. The body, of course, is a beautiful instrument. You also can hear them discovering about the body. Again, when the child is, as it were, content and at rest, you can hear the child making sounds. All sorts of sounds. One certainly remembers this from when my children were
very young, just lying in the cot for a period of time, just making sounds, all sorts of sounds. R's and E's and Oo's and gurgles and croaks, and just making sounds, practicing, not through any desire to practice, plainly, no sort of sense of desire in the way in which we might know about it. We might desire to practice an instrument, we might desire to practice the piano or the violin. But you hear this extraordinary process taking place, all about learning about their body, the extent of the body, what the body can do. And of course this goes on for a long time, doesn't it? Learning about the body, learning about how far the body can go. And you can see this going on throughout the whole period of childhood. The body continually being stretched, as it were, taken on. Yes, the body can crawl, and then the body can run, walk and run. The delight that comes with that for the child. Again, this tremendous sense of immediacy. So, the child has to learn all about his body. Then, of course, you become aware with the young child of these subtle qualities. Well, as has been mentioned before, children can be singularly content. They can also be singularly noisy. The responsiveness. The fact that they learn everything through play. Again, for the child, play. Well, play is an essential ingredient for the child. Right from a very early stage, you never get a sense that the child really takes things terribly seriously, unless we do. You know, unless mum or dad does, or the teacher does. Every moment presents itself as an opportunity for play. And of course, through this play, much is learnt. The child has great presence. And through this presence and through this activity of play, the learning process takes place. And it almost seems to take place despite what the teacher says or despite what the parents say. It's imbibed through all the senses available to the child. The child has this great capacity to watch and listen. And of course, in the very early days, it learns most rapidly and quickly from its parents. And the parents can very often be surprised at what the child learns from them. There was an incident I remember somebody recounting to me some time ago. A lady went to visit a family, and the family had a very young child. The young child was playing in the corner of a room and was playing with a toy, and this toy obviously wasn't working quite in the right way. And there was a great struggle taking place to get this particular toy working. And the parent was there at the time. And suddenly the little child threw this thing down in a complete rage and said, "Damn the bloody thing!" Now, where had he learnt that from? It's not taught, of course, in any direct way. Just picked up, imbibed. There is this extraordinary ability to learn, to take in, extraordinarily rapidly. This leads to another extraordinary feature of the child. It has to learn everything. Everything has to be learned. And just considering the lecture this morning, I just found the whole concept of the fact that everything has to be learned extraordinary. Just consider what it must be like. Maybe you can remember at the very earliest age, having no words available for thought, having no ideas, those having to come later, having to be taught those, but simply being and experiencing everything that was being presented now. As adults, we tend to use thoughts. We live with thoughts day in, day out. They're our tools. We can sit and listen, and as we listen, our thoughts weave around the words, and they may help us to relate what is being spoken to our own experience, so it seems. They can distract us. They can take us off into little dream worlds. We think, oh, the lecturer's getting a bit boring at the moment. And before you know it, you find yourself thinking about the summer holidays, or that Christmas is going to be soon, or what a marvellous day you had yesterday, a terrific party. This is all the realm of thought. For the child, there is no such realm of thought. This is what has to be taught, or we think it perhaps has to be taught. It certainly is learnt. Concepts of right and wrong, good and bad. Well, we've heard it all said that it's all relative, no doubt. But these concepts of good and bad, for example, have to be taught. It's where we learn them. We actually learn them. We may learn them from our parents. We may learn them, of course, from teachers. We may learn them from the society in which we find ourselves moving. But for the very young child, there is no concept of right and wrong. And again, this was very striking with the very young class. For the very young child coming in, 4.5, perhaps they hadn't been in a school before. They hadn't even met another child before, some of them practically, extraordinarily. And if somebody stood on their foot by accident, just thump them, push them. A response, no concept of good or bad about it, was just a response. It's interesting, this area of good and bad, because of course it's an area that we can all import into every situation. This is good, this is bad. But it's a bit of a dangerous one in a way. It's a very nice story about a man, an elderly man who had a son and had a horse. And that was all he had. And they lived in a disused fortress up on a hillside. It was an old, you can imagine, an old sort of wall with a gate and not much else. And that was all he had. And one day, the horse ran away. So his only possession had gone. And his neighbours came running up to him and said, "Gosh, I gather your horse has run away. That's jolly bad luck." The man said, "Is it? Maybe. Could be a good thing, could be a bad thing." And the next day, the horse came back. And it came, back with it came a whole herd of horses. Just brought them with it. And so the old man took all these horses and put them away inside his fortress, locked the door. And of course the villagers, the neighbours heard about this and thought, terrific. And went up to him and said, "What a wonderful thing has happened for you. Isn't it marvellous?" And the man said, "Is it? It could be a good thing, it could be a bad thing, couldn't it?" And then the next day, the son decided he would try and ride one of these horses. And the horses being wild, very quickly he found himself thrown to the ground and broke his arm. And of course the villagers heard about this and thought, "Oh dear, getting such bad luck, this chap." And they went up to him to commiserate with him and say, "It's jolly bad luck about you and your son." And man said, "Well, is it bad luck? It could be a good thing. It could be a bad thing. One just doesn't know." The very next day, the army swept through the countryside, moving to fight the barbarians in the hills. And as they went through the country, they were calling to arms all the young men, all the young and able-bodied men. And of course the only one who wasn't called was the young man who had broken his arm. And in the great battle that ensued, many lost their lives. It could be a good thing, couldn't it? It could be a bad thing, one just doesn't know. For the child, There is no division like that. There is this present moment in which they are living, and then everything is being presented to them, as it were, in that moment. And they can enjoy and participate in whatever is coming in the present moment. And that's plainly what is taking place. So there's this complete absence for the very young, and it's plainly not a permanent situation, this complete absence of knowing, of knowledge, what we call knowledge, knowing about things, and they have to learn. And so for the young, there is this process of expansion has to take place. The body expands, the body grows. They have to learn about the body. They have to learn what the body can do. It has to become skilled. It can become skilled. It may or may not. But it can become very skilled and can develop. And so in that sense can expand. Subtly the child expands. His world enlarges. The world for the very young child is very, very small, seemingly. It can be just the mother and child. And perhaps moving out to mother, father, if they're brothers and sisters. And that can be quite a big step. When the child goes to school, another big step. It's not always easy getting on with lots of other children who all want to play with the same box of bricks, want to read the same book, having to learn to tolerate. So the child has to learn to expand, as it were, the world of possibilities for him or her. His knowledge has to grow, and it does grow. But there's a curious thing which happens with this process of growth. One might expect this expansion to sort of imply an ever greater, ever better, ever fuller being almost. Yet at the same time as more and more is learnt, more and more is understood, and more seems to be known, you begin to see another process taking place. The building up of ideas. So you begin to get the ideas like, I can, and I can't. I can't swim. And the idea is very, very powerful. It's very powerful for all of us, children or adults. But for the child, you can see it very evidently. A child can't swim, he doesn't swim. Again, I recall with this very early class, we'd go swimming every week, and you get to the pool, and there are some that have been in the water since they were 6 months old probably. Just get to the water, throw themselves in, whether they need armbands or not. No fear at all. No idea about the water particularly. Before you know it, they're sort of spluttering and half drowning. Well, you drag them out again and put armbands on, but there's no fear. There are others for whom there's extraordinary fear of the water. In most cases, for a variety of different reasons, different sorts of experiences had led to this fear. And then this strong operation of an idea. I can't do this. I can't do this. And through persuasion and repeated practice, gradually the idea you could see changing. Until suddenly you got the idea, I can do it. Which could at times be equally tricky, because you've got the same situation again. They suddenly jump in without any armbands, and before you knew it, they'd be drowning again. But you get with this development of knowledge about things and about themselves, this seeming knowledge about themselves, you also get a sort of a process of limitation taking place. Thinking one knows how things are is how you might describe it. You know what's going to happen today. We've all got it, haven't we? You're going to wake up Monday morning, you know what you're going to be doing today, don't you? You know what's going to happen. You're going to go to work, the boss is going to present you with a certain amount of work to do. There'll be a certain plan, as it were, or scheme of events mapped out in the mind. And to a certain extent, this is how it actually will run. This is in the realm of knowledge, of seeming knowledge. For the very young child, it is without that. And what would it be like to be without that knowledge? Now, that is an interesting question, isn't it? The child has that for a long period of time, to be able to move through all the events of a day and a night without knowing anything about what's going to happen next. Not even interested in what's going to happen next. What might that be like? It is evident that for the young child it's incredibly happy. One of the great beauties when it was described at the outset of this talk that coming from the senior school to here was almost like a change from darkness to light. One of the great features of being here was the extraordinary happiness in a school of very young children. Everything is great fun. They don't have a clue what's going to happen next. You have to, as a teacher, learn to put yourself in that position so as you don't know what's going to happen next. And then when you don't know what's going to happen next, the whole operation becomes tremendous fun. But it is a very good question. What might it be like to move through a day, or you could even try a shorter period of time, just 10 minutes, without knowing what's going to happen next? I came this morning, I don't know whether I shall use any of these, there was a quite definite notion as to how one might present this talk. And there are a number of what one might have thought to be useful quotations. And being a teacher, one likes to have one's quotations and sources at hand. And just one or two books brought with me, just to be prepared. Sort of feel that one is living in the present. That's really rather akin to the knowledge that we can take around with us all the time. It's quite weighty. I mean, I had to bring all that on the tube this morning. It's quite a weight to it. And this area of knowledge of how you think things are going to be also has quite a weight to it. Now, it is interesting that the great teachers, all the great teachers, will find somewhere or other they will speak about children. And will speak about, in some way, the need to learn to think like the child, to be like the child. Jesus says, except ye become as little children, except ye become as little children, ye shall not enter the kingdom of heaven. I'll use one of these at least. One of the great Chinese masters speaks about it in slightly different terms, but it's really the virtue of the small. And again, you get in this, I think, this quotation, this sense of the fluidity of the child, its preparedness, in fact, not just preparedness to move with events as they keep coming to it, but actually that being its very nature. It couldn't act in any other way. This is, let's say, The great wave flows everywhere, to the left and to the right. The 10,000 things depend on it for life. It nourishes them all, holding nothing back. It accomplishes what needs to be, but takes no credit. It clothes and feeds all things, yet does not claim to be their Lord. It asks for nothing in return. It may be called the small. The 10,000 things follow it, return to it, yet it does not claim to be their Lord. Therefore it may be called the great. So too, the wise may become great by becoming small. Another aspect is to look at not just what do the wise say, but how do the wise behave. If the wise say, better to become like the little child, is that how they act? Well, again, a little story, if I may, from my portable library. Wrong one. This is a story of the Mullah Nasruddin, who was a Sufi teacher, quite a character. But that's always the characteristic of him, tremendous character. Nasruddin, when he was in India, passed near a strange-looking building, at the entrance of which a hermit was sitting. He had an air of abstraction and calm, and Nasruddin thought that he would make some sort of contact with him. Surely, he thought, a devout philosopher like me must have something in common with this saintly individual. I am a yogi, said the anchorite in answer to the mullah's question, and I am dedicated to the service of all living things, especially birds and fish. We come back to fish again, don't we? Pray, allow me to join you, said the mullah, for, as I had expected, we have something in common. I am strongly attracted to your sentiments, because a fish once saved my life. How pleasurably remarkable, said the yogi. I shall be delighted to admit you to our company. For all my years of devotion to the cause of animals, I have never yet been privileged to attain such intimate communion with them as you. Saved your life. This amply substantiates our doctrine that all the animal kingdom is interlinked. So Nasruddin sat with the yogi for some weeks, contemplating his navel and learning various curious gymnastics. At length, the yogi asked him, if you feel able, now that we are better acquainted, to communicate to me your supreme experience with the life-saving fish, I would be more than honored. I'm not sure about that, said the mullah, now that I've heard more of your ideas. But the yogi pressed him, with tears in his eyes, calling him master, and rubbing his forehead in the dust before him. Very well, if you insist, said Nasruddin, though I'm not quite sure whether you are ready to use your parlance for the revelation I have to make. The fish certainly saved my life. I was on the verge of starvation when I caught it. It provided me with food for 3 days.
I feel like the talk has perhaps rambled slightly. There is a direction, the direction as stated by, in the words of Jesus, except you become as little children, you shall in no wise enter the kingdom of heaven. Which it seems could be a practical direction for us all, if we could but look and see how the little child acts, responds, lives. It seems that in the presence, in the immediacy of response, in this freedom from what we take as to be the great weight of responsibility, in this realm of play, where everything that presents itself to the young child is a new experience in which to play, in which to learn and enjoy. Not a great challenge, not a great difficulty. If somehow we could actually see every moment in our life in that way, perhaps we would actually move towards this simple direction. So that nothing was too much trouble, because there's going to be tremendous fun, tremendous enjoyment, not just for oneself, but for everybody who participates in whatever sphere of life we find ourselves. I suspect life would be quite transformed, full of light, full of happiness. St. Paul says, he's very clear about the childhood. We know in part, we prophesy in part, but when that which is perfect is come, then that which is in part shall be done away. When I was a child, I spake as a child, I understood as a child, I thought as a child. But when I became a man, I put away childish things. For now we see through a glass darkly, but then face to face. Now I know in part, but then shall I know even as also I am known. Interesting phrase, isn't it? For now we see through a glass darkly. You can feel like that sometimes when things are getting really pressed. When the boss is shouting at you and the husband or the wife is shouting at you and nothing seems to be going right. Everything can seem dark. But perhaps if we could just begin to set aside what we think we know about a situation and begin just to participate. Just participate. Respond to what is being asked for, as it were. You'll find every situation is asking for something. If somebody comes to you and starts complaining about you or about their life or about something, you find that they're actually asking for something. And perhaps this dark glass might get transformed into the light and joy which one experiences in the child, in working with children, even in the very sounds that one has just been hearing coming through that door. The simple delight, the simple beauty and lightness.